In this video, I'd like to share a fascinating near-death experience story that you've probably never heard before. What's intriguing is that this person didn't just have one near-death experience, he had three. During these experiences, he witnessed remarkable things such as the origin of the universe and the Great Flood. He even conducted some interesting experiments in his spiritual form. Let's get into it. The person we're talking about today is called Tsuruhiko Kyuchi. He is a very famous astronomer in Japan. Astronomers have many specializations, and he specialized in the study of comets. In his lifetime, he discovered a total of 4 comets. Some might think that's not many, but as a comet hunter, that's quite a lot. Stars are easier to find because they emit light. Comets don't emit light, and they move very fast, so they are a lot harder to find. And so, Tsuruhiko is very famous in the world of astronomy. And in 1992, he discovered a comet that almost won him the Nobel Prize. Later, to honor his contributions to astronomy, they named an asteroid after him. This person's life initially followed a smooth trajectory, but he happened to experience 3 near-death experiences later on in life due to sudden, strange illnesses. First, it's important to emphasize that this person had no religious beliefs whatsoever and was a typical scientist. Before his near-death experiences, he didn't believe in life after death at all. His first near-death experience was in 1977, when he was only 22 years old. At that time, he suddenly contracted a very, very rare disease, acute mesenteric artery embolism. He was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment, but it was ineffective. He died after 40 minutes. Then suddenly, he came back to life. According to his recollection, during the 40 minutes of his death, he experienced many incredible things. First, he saw himself in a pitch-black place. Far away, he saw a faint light and slowly walked toward it. He walked into this light, which he said was the entrance to a tunnel. Entering this tunnel transported him to somewhere else. It was a grassland with various flowers blooming on it. He walked out of this tunnel and stepped on the soil. He felt the softness of the soil and even felt the grass growing from between his toes. He was barefoot. He walked forward, and after a few steps, suddenly saw a big river ahead. On the other side of the river, he could vaguely see something. When he reached the riverside, there was a small wooden boat waiting. After he got on the boat, there were no oars and no one to row for him. He had to row himself with his hands, and he felt tired. Halfway through, he said, "I'm too tired." Then after he rowed to the other side of the river, he collapsed on what seemed like a beach. At this time, 5 people walked towards him from a distance. He said he couldn't see them very clearly, but they were wearing white clothes, not Japanese or Asian clothes, but Western robes. One of them, a woman he didn't recognize, walked up to him and asked, "Why are you here?" He was stunned because he didn't know why he was there himself. Then these 5 people took him to the other side of the river and into a big mountain. Before climbing the mountain, he saw his deceased family members, his grandparents, and a cousin. Later, he learned that the woman who had spoken to him earlier was his father's sister, his aunt. His paternal aunt passed away shortly after he was born, so he never met her. Then he started climbing the mountain, and when he reached the top, a face appeared in front of him. Just a face. The face said something to him, but he doesn't remember what. Then the face disappeared. At that moment, as he hesitated, he suddenly felt himself back in his own body, back on the hospital bed. When he opened his eyes, he saw his parents standing by the bed. He felt his own heartbeat and realized that he had stopped breathing. When he realized this, his mother, who had been standing next to the bed, leaned over and said, "Ah, he's dead." Then his mother left the room in great sorrow, but his father remained standing by the bed, looking at him. At that moment, he was stunned, and then he spoke to his father, but his father didn't react. Then he sat up immediately, and when he sat up, his line of sight was about the same height as his father's. Logically, his father should have been looking at him, but he found that wasn't the case. His father was still looking at the bed, so he followed his father's line of sight and looked down, only to see himself lying on the bed. It was at this moment that he realized that the body sitting up was not his own. He also realized that when he thought he had woken up earlier, he hadn't. That was his soul. He found that he had vision, smell, and hearing. He smelled the scent of the hospital, but had no taste. He had no sense of touch. He couldn't touch people. His body could pass through objects and even walls. Although he had no sense of touch, he found something particularly incredible. He could feel the wind and temperature. He could feel the air. At this moment, he suddenly wondered where his mother had gone. When he thought about it, he instantly moved to his mother's side. His mother had gone downstairs to call his sister and tell her that he had died. He spoke to his mother, but his mother didn't react because she was on the phone with his sister. Then he thought of his sister and instantly moved to her. At that moment, his sister was sitting in the car on her way to the hospital. His brother-in-law and another sister were in the back seat. When he instantly moved there, he sat between the two of them and watched them. They were still talking. He could pass through them while they were talking. So he heard all the conversations in the car. Later, when he woke up, he confirmed with his sister. His sister asked, "How did you know?" It was because he teleported to her. So he's heard everything they talked about. As a scholar, his teleportation experience immediately made him think of something. If teleportation were possible, it would mean that time and space don't exist. He quickly deduced that he should be able to time travel. This was something a scientist would consider. A normal person might have been extremely nervous at this point and not known what state they were in. So he did something first. He tried to teleport to his childhood. He successfully teleported to his childhood, which unraveled a mystery for him from childhood to adulthood. When he was about 7 or 8 years old, he and his sister once went to play by the river. There were several large stones in the river that they could use to cross it. They were the only ones playing by the river at the time. While they were halfway across, he suddenly heard someone say "danger" near his ear. Following the sound, he saw a large stone rolling down from above, about to hit his sister. She hadn't noticed it yet. He immediately pushed his sister out of the way, and the stone rolled down the water. Due to the reaction force, he fell backward. At the time, he didn't know who had shouted the warning. This time, he found out it was himself. He had teleported to his childhood and saw himself and his sister playing by the river. He also saw the stone rolling down. He shouted "danger" to himself and saved himself. After this teleportation ended, he immediately thought of another thing. He wanted to teleport to the future to find out if he was alive. As a result, he successfully teleported to the future and saw himself at the age of 40. At that moment, he couldn't understand what he saw in the future. He saw himself standing on a podium, lecturing a group of college students. When he was 22, he wasn't even a lecturer. He never expected to become a renowned astronomer and, indeed, a professor at a university. This was his future. Not only did he see this future, but he also saw a further future, seeing himself in old age, surrounded by a group of children, teaching them to look at the stars with telescopes. It seemed very enjoyable, right? But one thing made him very uneasy. He saw that this image was translucent, and underneath it was a scene of ruins. According to his understanding, this future might be uncertain. So he saw two overlapping futures. To prove that his time travel was real, he did something. He thought, if I time traveled to the past, I should leave some evidence behind. And if this evidence could last until now, then when I go back to check now, we'll know that I really did time travel. So he traveled back 500 years and possessed a person. He found that he had this ability, and he could even possess his father and see himself from his father's perspective. After possessing a person, he arrived at a place called Tuzo Temple. Inside the temple, he wanted to write 2 Japanese characters, Tsuru, on a pillar using charcoal. He then proceeded to write the characters on the pillar. When he woke up, the first thing he did was go to Tuzo Temple. Over the years, the characters Tsuru had become faint, but could still be vaguely seen. The abbot of Tuzo Temple still has a book containing these events. It records everything that happened in this temple. Among them, there is a record of 500 years ago when 2 characters suddenly appeared on a pillar inside the temple saying Kiru. At that time, the abbot of the temple felt that it was a prophecy from heaven written on this pillar for them, the clergy. They studied it for a long time, but didn't understand its meaning. It's still there now, but it has become very faint after 500 or 600 years. This was Tsuruhiko's first near-death experience. He described this harrowing encounter in his book Uchiyu o Koeru Chikiyujin no Shimei Tokanusei, which is unfortunately unavailable in English, and one has to translate it to read the story, but worry not. We'll cover the rest of the book in the next video to come. So stay tuned as we unravel more mysteries. Like and subscribe if you like my content.